My husband and I have a tradition of going camping every spring since we've been together. 6 years dating, 3 years married, 9 years total. I wasn't going to let the fact that I was pregnant ruin that streak. I was in my 5th month, so almost there. I didn't have the weirdest of cravings like most people warned, and my baby was pretty calm. It would bump me every once in a while, but other than that, little one was a sleepy baby. Graham had asked me 1,000,002 times if I was sure I wanted to go, that it wouldn't hurt to miss 1 year, that we could go twice next year. I just laughed every time he worried, letting him know I was pregnant, not dying. We got the truck all packed up, food for the weekend, toiletries for the outhouses, and more water than necessary. I couldn't help but shake my head as that memory popped back up. It was our senior year of college and our 4th time going camping. The difference this time was that it was just us two. The 3 other times we had friends come along. It was our 4th year of dating and we decided we wanted a romantic camping getaway. Well, it wasn't very romantic. We ended up staying 1 night only because we ran out of water by sundown. Ever since then, we've always packed more than we thought we needed. Graham's red pickup was jammed to the brim, looking like a Tetris Pro's fantasy. He wouldn't even let me lift up my sleeping bag. I stood on the sidelines, hands on my puffy, pregnant hips as I watched my husband do all the work. "Babe," I quirked. "I'm not going to break, honey."
Can never be too careful.
Graham grunted, bumping the hatch closed with his hip.
Now, are you sure you want to go? We can go right back inside, snuggle up on the couch, throw in some pizza rolls, and turn on Netflix.
He smiled, wrapping his arms around me as best he could. "Oh," I melted into his arms. As tantalizing as that sounds, I want to go camping. I patted his butt before going to the passenger side. "Pizza rolls and Netflix, huh?" I called, laughing. "Sounds like our honeymoon." The all-too-familiar drive to the campground seemed like it passed in a blink. We had driven this road so many times that it seemed as natural as my heartbeat. I instinctively rubbed my stomach, watching the trees whiz by. I didn't look away until I felt Graham's hand on mine. He trapped my fingers in his and brought them up to his lips, planting a kiss on the palm of my hand.
I can't wait until little one can go camping with us.
He smiled. "I know," I squealed. "And we'll pack squirt guns, teach little one how to play bags, how to throw a football," I fantasized.
And what if it's a girl?
I turned my head and furrowed my brows. "What do you mean? Our kid's going to know how to throw a football regardless if it's a boy or a girl. It's one of the basic things you need to learn to survive," I explained, counting off my fingers. "Tie your shoes, wipe your ass, and throw a football." Graham erupted in laughter, his deep voice vibrating the air around us.
Gosh, I love you.
"I'm just playing," I giggled, rubbing my stomach again. Little one can do whatever they want. For the longest time, I had taken spring in Texas for granted. Having grown up here, I never knew anything else. It wasn't until I spent a year in Chicago that I realized how great Texas springs were. High 70s during the day, mid-50s at night, warm when you're awake and nice and cool for bedtime. That day was a particularly perfect spring day, 79 and sunny, not a dang cloud in the sky. I remember a warm breeze blowing through our car, carrying Graham with it. He had on his red flannel shirt, my favorite thing he owned. The cotton scent drifted to my nose and made me smile even more. He was perfect. The closer we got to the campgrounds, the more it smelled like musty earth and budding leaves. My leg bounced in excitement as we crossed the entrance gate. By then, we were on a first-name basis with the gate man, Greg. We said we would pay at the front like we normally did, but he refused. Told us we qualified for a free camp, a pregnant lady discount, he called it. He had saved us our favorite site, Site D. It was smack in the middle of the woods, far enough from the highway that we couldn't hear the cars, but close enough that in case anything happened, we could get help. It was in front of Little Lake Pond, a secret oasis hidden among the trees. It was too small to be called a lake, but too big to be a pond. At night, the moon shone off the water and illuminated every rock on the shore. Crickets and toads sang together, gently lulling you to sleep. We always requested Site D. Graham pulled up to our site and I carefully hopped out, clapping my hands at the surprise waiting for us. On the picnic table, baby balloons were tied all around with pastel-colored streamers gently getting swept up in the wind. Wrapped presents sat waiting for us to open, with cards saying, "Congrats and welcome new baby." But it was the plates of cookies and other goodies that called to me. "Well, look at that little one," I said, talking to my stomach. "You have friends already." We got all our coolers out and the eating station set up. And by we, I mean Graham. He still wouldn't let me do a thing. I felt horrible and wonderful at the same time. I was guilty because he had broken a sweat 30 minutes into getting our camp and was doing all the work. But I felt great because I didn't have to do a damn thing. I sat at the picnic table and ate, opened presents, read cards, and then ate some more. I couldn't believe that I was still hungry by the time dinner rolled around. Hot dogs over an open fire.
Now, make sure you cook yours all the way through,
Graham said. Huh? I grumbled, bouncing my stick around in the fire.
Your hot dog, make sure it's fully cooked. You don't want to poison the baby or anything.
I felt my shoulders slump and my mouth flop open in annoyance. Graham, if you don't shut up, this isn't the only weenie I'm going to be roasting tonight. His half-amused expression glowed in the orange flame.
Is that a threat?
I don't make threats. I pointed at him with a smile. He waited a beat before dropping his voice, staring at the dirt under his boots.
Summer, I'm serious.
I looked over at him and saw his worried face. He always looked so much older when he wasn't smiling. He was going to be a great dad. I leaned over and kissed his shoulder. I'm fine, I promise. Smiling, I scooted back over to my side. Plus, if you're so worried about what I'm eating, the last thing I should put in my mouth is a hot dog. I joked, holding the charred meat in front of me.
She's correct.
Another voice joined us. I jumped a bit, almost letting out a little pee in the process. I blamed the baby. We both turned around and saw a man in khaki shorts and a wilderness hat standing at the edge of the road. We didn't even hear his trailer pull up behind us.
Fatty tissue, animal feet, skin, strawberry products.
The man spoke, shuffling his feet.
Depending on what brand you buy.
Yummy, I groaned, still taking a bite out of the thing. I was too hungry. We're sorry. You scared us a bit. Didn't hear you pull up.
That's alright.
The man said.
I was just going to ask for directions.
Well, come sit. I invited, beckoning him to come over. You're welcome to a hot dog, despite the whole, byproduct thing. Graham wiped his mouth and stood up, holding his hand out to the approaching man.
Graham Steele,
he introduced.
Professor Jonathan Toole.
The man greeted, briefly shaking my husband's hand. I'm Summer, I smiled, taking another bite of my hot dog. The man sat down tentatively next to me, flicking a smile before gasping.
You're pregnant?
I mirrored his surprised look and stared down at my larger stomach. What? I looked over toward Graham and slapped his arm. Whoa, why didn't you tell me? I thought I was just getting fat. We laughed and looked over at the quizzical professor. I'm just kidding, I smiled, embarrassed at my failed joke.
May I?
He asked. I didn't even have to look at him to understand what he was asking. I nodded my head and he outstretched his hand, gently placing his palm against my belly. His eyes widened in wonder, despite the fact little one wasn't very active. I felt a genuine smile grow over my face at the man's wonderment. Crazy, huh? I asked. I can't tell you how long it took me to get used to the idea that I'm growing a human.
Remarkable.
Professor Jonathan mumbled.
Beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
He sat back and looked up at the two of us.
Do you know?
He pointed to my stomach, asking if we knew if it was a boy or a girl. Well, I'm hoping for a human, I joked, rubbing my stomach. No, we don't know. We want it to be a surprise.
Lovely.
Professor Jonathan smiled.
I never had any kids myself.
It's never too late.
Graham offered.
Oh, no.
The professor shook his head, waving the thought away.
I've given up on that idea. I have different kinds of kids.
He pointed behind him towards his trailer.
I'm an entomologist.
It was now our turn to not understand what he was talking about. I looked over at Graham for clarification, but he just shrugged his shoulders.
Bugs.
The professor explained.
I study bugs.
Oh, I nodded. And they're in there? I pointed towards the trailer.
Yes, would you like to meet them?
Without waiting for us to answer, he stood up and started walking toward his RV. I stood up, feeling Graham grab my arm next to me.
Wait,
He whispered.
you think it's alright?
Come on, Graham, I teased, scared of meeting some buggies. He shook his head and grabbed my hand, walking with me toward the opened RV door. The moment I was helped up the stairs, a smell assaulted my nose. A strange, metallic, sour, yet sweet smell that I could only describe as the scent of bug. You could hear all sorts of fluttering and flitting through the glass cases lining the walls. Flying bugs, stink bugs, moths, maggots. It seemed like every sort of bug in the world was in this little RV.
These are my kids.
Professor Jonathan smiled.
People misunderstand bugs. They can really be our friends if others would just give them time.
Really?
Graham asked, mostly out of politeness.
How is that?
I watched the professor's eyes light up from behind his glasses.
Take this beauty, for example.
He said, leading us toward a terrarium with blue beetles.
I'm studying the mutations these bugs have and how they can become a natural pesticide for farmers.
He smiled as he looked back and forth between us and the beetles.
They eat already dead plants, so they wouldn't harm the growth, and their scent is a natural deterrent to other plant-destroying bugs.
He walked over toward another glass case and pointed at the wriggling maggots inside.
These ones I'm trying to study how they could help the medical industry by eating dead flesh.
What? I asked, a grimace unceremoniously crawling across my face.
No, it's not a danger. You see, they only eat rotten things, not fresh. Say someone comes in with gangrene or frostbite. These guys can help clear away the dead cells in order for the new cells to regrow, or be put in its place.
And they would do that?
Graham asked, still holding on to my hand.
And that's what I'm studying. The effect they have on humans. So far, everything seems to be going in the right direction.
Professor Jonathan smiled. That's wonderful. I nodded. You could make some great progress. My eyes wandered over the cases that were eye level with me. I thought the one was empty until a stick in the corner started moving. The carefully disguised bug gently crawled over the foliage, not even noticing that I was there. A noise to my right caught my ear. It was a faint, weird buzzing noise, like someone was spinning a coin in an empty can of soda, tinny and hollow. I stepped up toward the glass and saw a gray cone hive in the corner of the terrarium. The hole in the front was tiny, so I couldn't see inside of it, but I sure could hear it.
Oh, that's a beauty.
The professor's voice was right in my ear.
That's the Megarissa Rexator. I wish she would come out.
That's fine, I assured, not quite sure myself if I actually wanted to see the thing that was making that noise.
She's pregnant.
He added. Ah, cheers. I nodded to the humming hive. Mama needs her sleep.
She has to find a place to lay her larvae.
His brows furrowed, searching her terrarium. Looks like she's got a decent-sized home right there. I pointed toward the gray cone. Could be bigger, but if it's just her and her baby, seems like it'd be roomy.
I guess.
The professor shrugged.
Yes, it'll do. She's expecting any minute. I've been looking for days.
He said, standing up straight, looking down at me.
Hopefully she's found her perfect spot. When are you due, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh, that's fine. I'm in my 5th month. Almost there.
Lovely. Cravings? Baby moving around?
Somewhat, but so far so good.
Hun,
Graham said from over my shoulder.
we should head back. Don't want to leave our fire unattended for too long.
Of course.
Professor Jonathan said, shooing us away.
Have a nice night. Get some rest. Stay healthy.
He smiled, grabbed my hand, and looked me in the eye.
You've been a great host.
I stood there for a moment, looking at my own confused reflection in his glasses. I didn't really understand what he meant, but I figured he was just being nice. I smiled and said, "You're welcome," before leaving the trailer with Graham.
Giving me the creeps.
I heard Graham grumble, pulling me back to our campsite.
Why did we go in there again?
I don't know, I shrugged, grabbing another hot dog to roast. He seemed nice?
He didn't seem weird to you? Off? Not all there?
Graham, I scolded.
What? I'm just saying, the man's driving through the forest with a bugmobile, inviting people in to see his kids.
I held the hot dog over the flames and watched it sizzle. To each his own. The rest of the night was peaceful. Professor Jonathan drove off and parked a couple sites down from us, and I assume he made camp there. I relished in the late-night moonlight for a bit, dipping my toes into the sparkling water.
Come on, it's almost 1 a.m.
Graham stretched, yawning as he stood up.
Water's cold, and we don't want to become a mosquito buffet.
A few more minutes, I pretended to whine, crossing my arms in a mock pout.
Suit yourself.
He shrugged, heading to his truck bed.
But don't blame me for hogging the blankets when you try crawling in.
I watched him pull down the hatch and unzip the bug net, shimmying into our makeshift nest. Ah, crap, I grumbled, rushing over toward him, slapping a mosquito off my arm.
Did you get bit?
He asked, voice a bit panicked. I don't know, I shrugged, trying to unzip the net. Let me in. Graham had me up in the truck bed before I could complain about getting in by myself. He tightly zipped the net shut and gently grabbed hold of my arm, looking at the red slap mark I had made.
I don't see any bump.
He said more to himself than me.
Does it itch?
No. Babe, for the 80 millionth time, I am okay. I sighed, grabbing onto his face. You're going to croak before this baby is born if you keep worrying like this.
I know.
He nodded, kissing my cheek.
I'm sorry. Good night.
Love you, I smiled, snuggling into his grasp. With the crickets and the toads singing in the distance, I fell asleep like a charm. It wasn't until I had a strange dream that my sleep was disturbed. I dreamt I was in a room from what I could remember. I could only describe it as cold. Cold hues, cold metal, cold air. My breath puffed out around my head as I walked, looking for that noise. It buzzed, vibrating the hairs at my ears. The more I walked, the louder it got, but the colder it got too. The wall seeped a wet goo that shined in the gray light. My feet squelched against the ground, slipping and threatening to make me fall. I held my hands out, trying to get my balance, but all I felt was thick air. My palms went slick as I flailed them through the atmosphere, like I was walking through clouds. I seemed to blink once, and it was in front of me, a furnace. Its muddy body slick with the same goo that covered the walls. It hummed, begging me to come closer for its warmth. Dream me crept forward, the buzzing becoming part of my body. I felt it reverberate against my bones, settling deep in the pit of my stomach. Its heat finally cut through the thick chill, wafting over my body in humid waves. The cold mist steamed off, hissing as it sizzled against my hot skin. I was face to face with the furnace, but my eyes were out of focus. I blinked and blinked, slowly concentrating on the buzzing oven. Bugs, millions of them, crawling over each other. It was no furnace. It was a hive. Tiny wings flitted, spitting up bits of dust, spiny legs sticking to everything they came in contact with. I looked down and saw the very first one reach out toward my stomach, sticking its spiky legs into my skin. Soon, my entire stomach was littered with wasps, and the radiating heat turned into a burning sting, spearing through my body. I doubled over and opened my mouth, letting out an echoing scream. As I did, the wasps took flight, covering the air in stinging clouds. I woke up to the same stinging pain, just condensed to one area. I hissed and sat up on my elbows, rubbing my stomach. Graham was instantly awake too, leaning over me.
What is it? What time is it? The baby's coming?
He slurred, still half asleep. I couldn't help but laugh through my grimaced face. No, dork. I think something bit me.
Where? Let me see.
I sat up as much as I could and lifted my shirt. A little red dot lay below my belly button, a tiny bump directly underneath. Nothing else was around it. No cut, no oozing wound, no spidering lines, just a dot and a bump.
Do you think it was the spider?
Graham asked. It feels like a bee sting, the stinging coming back in waves. I can feel the pulse in my stomach.
We're going home,
Graham said, not waiting for me to agree. This time, I didn't argue with him. I was in pain and a little worried, if I must admit, but I would never have told Graham that. He would have had a fit right then and there. We quickly packed up and were up and out in a matter of 30 minutes. My stomach still stung, but it was getting less and less. I put some Neosporin on it and a cold rack. Our truck kept getting stuck in the grooves of the road. Something had driven through there that was obviously too heavy to be on wet dirt trails. They led to a campsite a couple of spaces ahead of us, where Professor Jonathan's RV used to be. Wonder where he went off to so early, I thought aloud.
Well, looks like he took a shortcut.
Graham said, pointing out his window. The deep grooved tracks left the campsite across the dirt path and disappeared into the woods. Wouldn't that go right by the highway? I asked, looking through the back window as we drove by.
If he made it through the maze of trees, I guess it would.
Graham shrugged, pulling up toward Greg's gate office. The old man walked out with a big smile on his face.
Leaving so soon, kids?
Yeah.
Graham breathed, running a hand through his bed head.
Summer got stung by something. I'm just going to take her home.
Is she all right?
Greg's voice mirrored my husband's. I'm fine, I called from the passenger side, poking my head over Graham's shoulder. Could I use your phone, though?
Of course.
Greg nodded, running to my door to help me out. Going to call the doctor, I said, just to make sure I don't need some special help baby defend against bee stings medicine or something. I told Greg thank you as he showed me to his office, and I plopped down in his chair by the phone. I dug around in my bag until the little laminated card slipped between my fingers and hastily dialed my doctor's number. I wouldn't have been so nervous if little one wasn't flopping around so much. Baby didn't like something. I knew bee stings, or bug bites in general for that matter, wouldn't reach all the way to where baby was, but what if some poison got in my blood? What if it was going directly to little one? Or he could just feel that I was stressed out, making him stressed out, and making me more stressed out. I'm not sure, but I do know that after one reassuring talk with the doctor, I was fine. No more jitters, no more flips. My sting still stung, but that was normal. Doc said to take care of the bite and that little one would be just fine. Just drink some fluids and I should be all good. And I was, until later that night. We were on the couch and I heard it again, that buzzing from my dream. It was in my left ear, tingling my brain and making my scalp itch. I jumped up and tried sticking my finger in my ear.
What?
Graham asked, fumbling next to me. I think a bug's in my ear. I groaned, bending over and pounding my forehead, trying to make it fall out.
What?
Bug! I growled in annoyance. I stood up and went over to the kitchen sink, turning on the water and sticking my head under the faucet, hoping to flush out whatever was in there. I'd gotten up way too fast and my vision started to blur a bit. I sputtered under the water, hands too frantic to correspond with my brain. The rushing water battered against my eardrum, overpowering the buzzing noise. I finally shut off the faucet and breathed. And that's all I heard. Me breathing, no more buzz. I sighed and stretched my neck, wiping my wet bangs off my forehead. But I felt like throwing up when I looked out the window. There he was, Professor Jonathan. He was in our yard under the oak tree staring straight at me. The light from the kitchen sink gently glinted off his glasses, making him look like he had glowing eyes.
Hon?
Graham's voice was right behind me, his hand on my shoulder making me flinch.
Whoa, it's okay.
Do you see him? I asked, turning toward Graham and dragging him to the window.
Who?
Professor John... My voice cut off in my throat. We were both looking into our empty yard filled with nothing but strobing fireflies and gently rustling bushes. He was there. I knew he was there. I looked at him with my own two eyes. I pressed my palms against the counter and leaned forward, getting as close to the glass window as I could before touching it with the tip of my nose. He had to be out there somewhere. I flew backwards into my husband's arms. This time, my bladder wasn't as strong as I'd hoped. Again, I blamed little one. Something had flown into the window and crashed against the glass, making a dull ting sound. A pebble? A rock? I didn't see what it was when it happened, but when I looked back, I saw it still stuck in the glass. Splattered in a pile of its own goo was a beetle. Its iridescent purple shell was shattered to pieces, and its unforgettable bug stink slowly seeped its way into our house. Graham rubbed my shaking shoulders as I caught my breath.
It's just a bug.
He soothed, resting his chin on the top of my head.
You're okay.
Oh, God, I sighed, burying my head in Graham's chest. I'm losing my mind. My muffled laugh vibrated against his shirt.
let's just go to bed.
He said, turning off the TV and guiding me upstairs. When I finally got to bed, I couldn't help but lift the blankets and sheets just to make sure there were no bugs waiting for me. I hoped a good night's sleep would help unfog my brain. A good night's sleep might have helped me if I'd actually gotten one. I had another nightmare. It felt so real. I actually thought I lived it. In my dream, I woke up in bed. That sentence alone sounds wrong, but stay with me. In my dream, I woke up in bed. It wasn't from a third-person point of view either. It was first-person. I was seeing through my eyes. I woke up and stared at the ceiling, something that should have clued me into the fact I was dreaming. I hadn't slept on my back in months. Anyway, I was laying there absent-mindedly rubbing my stomach, something I did all the time when I felt little one move. I smiled and gave Baby a playful pat, letting little one know I was there. Baby moved again, and then my muscle twitched. I guess you could say it was a contraction, because technically my muscles were contracting, but I didn't feel any pain. It just felt like an involuntary twitch. I could see my stomach bouncing up and down under the covers, my muscles making my entire body dance against its will. And then the sting. The radiating burn of something piercing my skin sunk over my entire stomach. And then the buzz. I tried screaming, but I couldn't. Nothing would come out, like my vocal cords were cut, and I didn't want to, but I pulled back my blanket and saw bugs crawling out of my stomach. They'd burrowed their way through my skin and popped out of my belly button. They shook out their antennae and walked across my skin, leaving tiny blood trails. I finally made a noise, but it wasn't a scream. It was a gurgle. I gagged and choked, vomiting up a ball of wasps, their spiky legs breaking through the mucus pack before shaking off their wings and buzzing around the air. I woke up half gagging. Graham was gently rubbing my back, thinking it was just a late round of morning sickness. I didn't have the heart to tell him my nightmare. I didn't have the stomach to think about it, really. I waited until after he left for work, and then I called my mom. I had to talk about it. "Do you think it means anything, Ma?"
Your dream?
She asked, her voice raising at the end of her question.
Are you kidding me? If I believed every weird dream that I had, I would have sprouted wings and ran off with John Wayne.
I laughed and opened the fridge, looking for something that would satisfy my hunger.
You're stressed.
My mom said.
That's all it is. About the baby, about life, who knows what. Even if you don't realize you're stressing, you are. Welcome to motherhood.
I laughed again, now opening the freezer. My eyes spotted the black and white ice cream container and my mouth watered. The clock may have read 7:30 in the morning, but it was ice cream o'clock for me. I grabbed the carton and tore open the lid, fishing through the drawer for a spoon. "So, you think I'm fine?" I asked, scooping out a chunk of the frozen treat. I didn't even have to look at it to know it was vanilla. That's all Graham liked. "What about seeing things? I swear, I saw someone in our yard last night."
Summer,
Mom sighed.
when your grandfather died, I swear I saw him all over the place. The grocery store, driving in cars next to me out of the corner of my eye. It's just your brain playing tricks on you. You need to stop thinking about this. It'll just stress the baby out even more.
I was on my third scoop by the time she was done talking. I don't remember a time I've ever been that hungry for something. I was completely ravenous. My mouth was numb, and I could feel the brain freeze starting to settle in, but I just kept scooping the spoon back into my mouth, swallowing frozen chunks. I caught my breath and let the newest scoop melt into a ball against my tongue. I smooshed it around in the roof of my mouth before gently chewing on the crunchy nuggets before swallowing. My eyes had locked on the kitchen window a while ago, the splattered bug still in its place. The morning sun shone through the lime green guts of the bug, casting a faint light against my kitchen counter. The flattened bug was in utter pieces. Its legs were completely separated from its body, and one of its antennae had turned to dust. The thing was, I didn't see any wings. The body was completely open and shattered. I would have seen at least a pair of wings, but there was nothing. It didn't fly into the glass. It was thrown. I bit down onto a particularly big chunk when my mind thought something. This is vanilla ice cream. There shouldn't be chunks. I looked down at the half-eaten carton and saw carcasses of beetles, cocoons, and maggots half buried in the melted treat. The overbearing taste of earth and guts clung to my tongue. I doubled over and gagged, spitting up chunks of half-bitten worms and beetle armor. I could feel one of their legs caught between my teeth as I gagged again.
Honey, what's wrong?
Mom panicked, her voice audible despite the fact I dropped the phone. I just kept gagging, turning on the faucet to swish out my mouth. I tried speaking through a gag. Bugs! I'm...
Summer, stop. You're scaring me.
Bugs! I cried, grabbing the phone. I ate bugs!
How? What do you mean?
I ran over to the freezer and rummaged through the other food, sure that nothing in there was that old. Mom, I don't know. I was eating and then I looked and there were bugs in my food.
Ugh, honey, clean your fridge.
Mom mumbled. No, Mom, it's not that. I argued, turning back around. I don't... My mouth hung open at what I saw in the sink. Vanilla ice cream. That's it. No bugs, no wings. Just ice cream. I looked back in the carton and saw the creamy treat speckled only with little vanilla pod seeds. Spittle dribbled out the side of my mouth, tasting only like vanilla. I openly sobbed, squeaking out incoherent noises that were all just beginnings of questions. But I was... I let the tears freely flow down my cheeks, filled with nothing but confusion.
That's it. I'm coming over.
No. Mom, I'm fine.
Clearly not.
She argued, but I could tell she wasn't going to come over.
Honey, maybe you should go to the doctor just to get a checkup. It could help clear your mind, bring some comfort to you.
I nodded my head before realizing she couldn't see my affirmation. Yeah, I think I will. I still didn't call Graham, not after the ice cream incident, not in the car ride to the doctor, and not in the waiting room. I figured what he didn't know wouldn't hurt him. I mean, there was nothing he could really do. It was me who was going crazy. That's what it felt like. That I was losing my mind.
Mrs. Steele?
A nurse called my name. I stood up and smiled, following her through a maze of hallways until I got to a room. She said my doctor would be there shortly and just to hang tight. I smiled again and said thank you, hoping my anxiety wasn't showing. It did help that the room had a television. At least I had something to keep my mind occupied. Sadly, the news was on, and there was never anything good to report. It didn't really do much good on keeping my brain calm. Luckily, my doctor came in pretty quickly.
Hi, Summer.
Dr. Stevens smiled. He took the pin out from behind his ear and shoved it in his pocket.
How's little one doing?
He knew what me and Graham called the baby and started using the nickname too. Good, I think, I smiled. It's just... my mind. I tried explaining. I saw Dr. Stevens smile, nodding his head.
Don't worry. Whatever you're experiencing, I'm sure it's normal. Your body is going through a great transformation right now. Things are going to get jumbled up.
I know, I nodded. But this is weird. I waited until I had his full attention, until I started talking again. I'm seeing things.
Things?
He asked, grabbing my chart.
Like stars, black spots. That could be a sign of low...
No, I interrupted. Bugs. I see bugs. Dr. Stevens stopped for a moment, lips pursed in thought. I watched his eyes scan my chart before something twinkled in them.
You got stung, right?
He watched me nod my head before going on.
It's paranoia. You got stung. You got hurt. And now you're hypersensitive to everything.
I don't think so. I shook my head. They're really vivid.
Your brain is a powerful thing.
He laughed, taking his stethoscope off from around his neck.
You're at 21 weeks, correct?
I have no idea, I confessed. That's 5 months, right? The doctor laughed and shook his head.
Go by weeks. It's easier that way, trust me.
He put the cold stethoscope against my stomach and moved it around, trying to find little one's heartbeat.
Oh?
He quirked, looking at my skin.
Did you get a vaccine recently?
No. I shook my head, looking down at my skin. He was pointing at a red dot and lump under my belly button. That's where I got stung. He stopped moving his stethoscope around and flicked his eyes up at me a moment.
Huh.
Huh? I asked, sitting up straight. What does that mean?
Nothing.
He shook his head, replacing the stethoscope back around his neck. He pulled his seat up and looked at my sting.
This just doesn't look like a sting. It looks like a reaction to a vaccine. I've seen it before, and it's completely harmless. Just something that happens to the skin after shots, sometimes.
Yeah, well, I scoffed. I didn't get any shots. I went camping and got stung by something. I saw Dr. Stevens gently shake his head before leaning forward, clasping his hands together.
Miss Steele, I'm gonna ask you a personal question, and I hope you don't take offense.
I nodded for him to continue.
Do you use illegal substances?
What? I gasped. You think...
I don't think anything.
He shook his head.
I'm just trying to get to the bottom of what this could be.
He motioned to my red mark. It's not that, I hissed. I would never do anything that would harm my baby. I looked away from the doctor in disgust. I took offense.
I'm sorry.
He apologized.
I didn't mean anything by that. Let me go get your file and see what we've done. Maybe this is a late reaction to something.
He shrugged and then left me alone in the room. I threw my shirt back down over my stomach, rubbing my baby bump lightly. I felt like leaving, finding a whole new office to go to. This whole experience put a bad taste in my mouth, worse than the bug-filled ice cream. I was about to get up and leave when something on the news caught my attention.
In a serious turn of events, the RV of Professor Jonathan Toole was found abandoned on the side of Highway 45 this morning.
The anchorman said, his face immediately replaced with a picture of the RV. The same RV that snuck up behind me and Graham when we were camping. The same RV that we went into and looked at those creepy bugs. Except now, it was broken and smoking. The door was thrown open and broken glass could be seen inside.
Professor Toole has been missing since early this month. Police say he was last seen leaving his home, heading to a medical convention in Houston. His family reported him missing, along with many of his medical tools and his RV. The public is asked to report any information about Jonathan Toole's whereabouts to the police.
A second image popped up on the screen. A man, mid-40s, blonde hair, green eyes. I'd never seen him before in my life, but the photo's caption begged to differ. That was a picture of Professor Jonathan Toole. My fingers went numb the longer I looked at the picture. He looked nothing like the man we met camping. He looked nothing like the Jonathan Toole we met. The one that sat by the fire with us. The one that showed us his kids. The one I saw in my backyard. The door opened, and from the corner of my eye, I saw a nurse walk in.
Here, ma'am.
His voice echoed around the room like approaching thunder. I spun around to face him. The same twinkling eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses looked back at me. He held out a cup of water for me to take. His smile widened when he saw the recognition on my face slowly being replaced by fear.
You look thirsty.
He teased, stalking forward. I screamed as loud as my body would let me. I smacked the cup of water away and grabbed for something to throw. My hand wrapped around a metal tissue dispenser and I flung it forward. I heard a sickening crack as blood flung from his nose. He slipped out and held his palm up to his face, scrambling to get out the door. I hadn't stopped screaming. Nothing in particular, just a guttural alarm signaling that I needed help. No more than a couple seconds after the man disappeared from the room, another nurse and my doctor came running in. That nurse! I pointed out the door. There was a man in here dressed as a nurse! Dr. Stevens looked down the hall and shrugged his shoulders at the actual nurse in the room. The real nurse rushed out of the room, and before Dr. Stevens could tell me to calm down, I ordered an ultrasound.
Now, Miss Steele, you need to...
What I need is an ultrasound! I yelled. Something is wrong, and I need to make sure my baby is okay! You need to make sure my baby's okay! Dr. Stevens just nodded, calm as always.
All right, but you need to relax. Stress is not good for the baby, and if there's something else going on, stress will only make it worse.
He waited until I took a couple of deep breaths before talking again.
I'm going to ask you some questions before I prep the room, all right?
I nodded.
Do you feel any pain?
I shook my head. But I've had butterflies in my stomach since I got here. Little one's been doing somersaults all morning.
but no pain.
He asked again, making me shake my head.
All right, good. Are you on any new medication?
No, nothing's different. I've done nothing different, I answered, wringing my hands. Doctor, I think something's wrong. I couldn't help my voice from cracking. I felt sick, physically and emotionally. That man, whoever he was, I knew he did something to me, and I didn't know if it was just from everything that had happened this morning or if something was actually wrong, but my gut was telling me to get help, and it wasn't just a nightmare, that it wasn't just paranoia.
Well, you're here.
He smiled.
If there is something wrong, we will stop it.
He squeezed my shoulder and walked out of the room. I waited until I couldn't hear his footsteps before I dug into my purse to get my cell phone. I wanted Graham here. I needed Graham here. I dialed his number and he picked up after the first ring.
Hi, babe.
He shouted, loud machinery going off in the background.
How are you?
I stumbled, trying to find the right words that wouldn't scare him. Well, I'm at the doctor's.
What happened?
He asked. I would have laughed if I wasn't so scared myself. I'm getting an ultrasound just to make sure little one's okay, I partially told him. Want to stop by?
Of course.
I could hear the sincerity in his voice.
This wasn't scheduled, was it? I would have stayed home if it was.
No, I assured. I just want to make sure the baby's fine. Come quick, okay?
All right.
He said, voice not sounding 100% stress-free.
I love you.
I love you too. By the time Graham got to the doctor's office, I was already in another room with jelly on my belly. He walked in with worried lines crinkling on his face. His skin smoothed out into a smile when he saw me, though. He rushed over and planted a kiss on my cheek, sitting in the chair next to where I was laying.
Everything all right?
He asked, looking at my face. I went to answer him, but broke down into tears. Graham. He brushed my hair back, waiting for me to talk. That man at the campsite wasn't who he said he was. I wanted to tell him everything I saw on TV. The missing report, the RV photo. I wanted to tell him about the ice cream, the constant tummy flutters, the nurse, but I didn't have time. Dr. Stevens walked back into the room.
As you can see, it's been an emotional day.
He looked at my tear-stained face.
There's been some distress, some paranoia, which is normal for a first-time mother.
Dr. Stevens assured.
But we're just going to take a quick look and make sure the baby's fine.
Paranoia?
Graham asked me.
About what happened last night?
Yeah, and something happened this morning with bugs, and I waved it off. I don't know. I did know, though. That's the thing. But I couldn't explain it with the doctor in the room. He would think I was crazy. I knew only Graham would understand. No one else.
All right.
Dr. Stevens called our attention to the screen.
Here is...
He stopped, squinting at the screen. He moved the wand around my stomach, pressing it deeper in some parts of my skin. His brows stayed furrowed the entire time. I felt a halo of sweat beat across my forehead at the lack of enthusiasm coming from my doctor. He turned the monitor away from us and clicked some buttons, his eyes searching the picture for something. Is everything all right? I asked, feeling Graham grab my hand.
One moment.
Dr. Stevens said, sticking his head out the window.
Nurse, can you get Dr. Volp for me?
He came back in the room and moved the wand around some more.
Can you tell us what's going on?
Graham demanded. Dr. Stevens opened his mouth and closed it again before taking a deep breath.
Our monitor is picking something up, and I don't know if it's a false read or not.
What is it picking up? I panicked. What about the baby? Is the baby all right? Its heart and everything?
That's part of the problem.
Dr. Stevens said, painstakingly slow. Before I could go on any further, another doctor came in, sidling up next to Dr. Stevens. My stomach cramped and I felt my muscles twitch. I winced a bit and huffed out a ragged breath.
Summer, are you all right?
Dr. Stevens asked. Yeah, just I stuttered, feeling another cramp. Nerves.
Do you see that?
The other doctor pointed to the screen.
That...
She looked at Dr. Stevens before looking back at me.
Ma'am, are you having twins?
What? I asked. No, it's just... 1, I yelled, grabbing at my twinging stomach. The pain had started as a cramp, but the more they poked at my skin, the deeper and more powerful the pain got. My muscles churned and felt hot like someone was pouring boiling water through my veins.
Oh my god, it moved.
Dr. Stevens swallowed. He flung his stethoscope off from around his neck and held it to my skin, sliding it all around before pointing at the other doctor.
I'm not getting a heartbeat. Prep an OR.
What?
You're going to operate?
What about my baby? I stuttered.
Yes, we need to operate.
My baby doesn't have a pulse?
There's a mass, what looks to be the umbilical cord wrapped around your child.
Is little one okay? I kept asking all these questions, but no one seemed to hear me.
I need to go in there before any further damage can be done.
With still no answers to any of my questions, I was placed in a wheelchair and was being ran down the hallways. The white walls studded across my vision as the fluorescent lights blared off the floor. The chair's squeaking wheels were matched with the rubber soles of the doctor's shoes and the swishing scrubs being hurriedly pulled on. Just behind me, I could hear Graham's thudding boots racing down the halls with us, and all the while, a faint buzzing rang through my ears. The table was too cold, but I wasn't really in the position to complain. I could barely feel the thin gown they threw on me. Then again, I couldn't really feel anything. Everything from my mid-stomach down was numb, thankfully. I could hear people talking, but it sounded distant, almost muffled, like someone was holding pillows over my ears. I couldn't take my eyes off the circular lamp above me. My eyes burned, begging me to blink, but for some reason, I was scared. I didn't want to move, talk, blink, do anything that could possibly affect the outcome of my baby. I should have asked more questions, demanded to be told what they saw on that screen, demanded to see the damn thing for myself. It was my baby, my stomach, my picture. It was meant for my eyes. But I chickened out. There's something about medical professionals yelling, "Your baby's in danger," that makes you shut up and let them drag you around. I would have jumped into a vat of acid if it meant my baby was going to be okay. My eyes finally stopped swirling and I blinked, swallowing before asking, "Where's Graham? Is my baby... Is this it? Am I becoming a mom right now? Is this it?" I asked, looking up at the masked nurse. "It can't be, right? It's too early." The nurse looked over where I assumed Dr. Stevens was. I couldn't see past the green sheet they hung up over my shoulders. All I could do was try to read the nurse's body language. I saw their shoulders flick upward gently, trying to conceal a shrug. He shook his head slightly too, fumbling on what to do with his hands. Above all of that, he wouldn't look me in the eye. He had no clue what was going on. None of them did. I heard my heart monitor in the background start beeping faster than it already was. The nurse's head snapped toward the machine and disappeared from my sight, leaving me to stare back at the round light again.
Miss Steele?
I heard Dr. Stevens' voice.
We're going to start now, okay?
"Where's Graham?" I asked, grabbing onto the side of the table.
He should be here soon.
He assured. I heard clinking and shuffling sounds from behind the curtain.
"Scalpel,"
he called. "No, wait!" I panicked. "What are you doing? Tell me what you're doing!" The nurse appeared back in my vision. "Graham needs to be here,"
"He's coming, Miss Steele.
the masked nurse assured.
You need to relax."
His kind eyes squinting in what I could only assume was a smile. I didn't remember when I had lifted my head, but as I laid it back down, my neck spasmed, the muscles trying to relax. I didn't feel any pain when they cut me open, but I felt something. It was unlike anything I had ever felt before. It was as if my skin was being unzipped and folded over, or as if a balloon was gradually deflating, the compression slowly being released. I felt pressure inside my body, like someone was pushing on my stomach, trying to wiggle my intestines around. The doctor's hushed tones did nothing to calm my nerves. I wanted to know what was going on, even if they were just speaking doctor lingo. I wanted to hear it. I remember thinking I just wanted to hear something other than my stupid heart monitor. You can't imagine the guilt and horror that flooded over my body when my silent wish was granted. Within a matter of seconds, the calm operating room erupted. It started with Dr. Stevens' split-second gasp. That's what lit the fuse to the chaos.
Holy shit!
A nurse screamed, backing away from the table.
Cut it!
The doctor called.
Don't let it
I can't.
Dr. Stevens panicked.
It won't let go.
I was about to ask them what was happening when I heard it. The buzzing. There was the sound of the air being cut in half and the splatting patter of droplets being shaken off something. The buzzing grew louder, but it did nothing to overpower the screams. Squeaking shoes shuffled around me. Whether they were running to get supplies or running away, I couldn't tell. Bodies rushed around me. Almost all of them had gloves covered in blood and something else. Mucus was sprayed on the fronts of their gowns and on some unfortunate nurse's mask. "My baby," I said, trying to get someone's attention. "Is my baby okay?" They all ignored me, too preoccupied with whatever was happening behind the curtain. Dr. Stevens barked out orders for more of this, more of that, a sharper knife. At first, I thought it was just an emergency with me, like I was bleeding out or something. But then the buzzing came back, and I felt puffs of air with each zap of noise. The curtain around my shoulders gently blowing. It hissed and grew louder the more the nurses and doctors worked. I saw a flash of green scrubs drop to the ground next to me, one of the nurses screaming as they hit the linoleum floor. I looked over the edge as best I could, but could only see their legs and feet writhing on the ground. The nurses' shoes bounced off the ground, making a dull thunk noise with each tremor. They convulsed and sputtered. Their voice sounded like it was trying to escape around a swelling throat. Other nurses bent down to their fallen friend, crying for towels to help stop the bleeding. I heard Graham's voice cursing from behind me as he rushed into the room. His boots thudded up to the operating table, and I reached out for him. I looked up and saw a look on him that I never want to see again. He fumbled to a stop next to me, looking behind the curtain. His eyes rolled in his head and the color drained from his face. Graham was an expressive man, always willing to share what was on his mind, and his eyes always gave away what he was truly thinking. That's why it terrified me when his face looked absolutely blank.
"We need to cut higher,"
Dr. Stevens yelled.
Doctor,
The kind-eyed nurse from before asked.
but she's not properly numbed for...
"Hold her down!"
My doctor ordered. Before I could move, the nurse had my wrist pinned down by my head. He still wouldn't make eye contact with me. His hazel eyes were splattered with tears, salty droplets splashing down off his cheeks and landing on my forehead. The unzipping feeling was back, but this time it brought with it a searing hot pain. Torn flesh isn't something your conscious mind is supposed to recognize, but that was the only explanation for what I felt was happening to me. A roar erupted from my throat, and I easily broke out of the nurse's grasp. "Stop!" I cried, trying to sit up.
"Hold her down!"
Dr. Stevens screamed, the buzzing sound only growing louder and angrier. A stronger grasp latched around my arms, throwing me back down onto the table. I looked up to see Graham, his eyes now a shadowed hue that wasn't his. They looked glassy and empty, like a vacant house. I thrashed against his arms, but barely moved. I couldn't help the screams that exploded from my mouth. I could feel my throat strain, and I knew yelling wouldn't help me any, but I couldn't stop. I started to taste blood with every new scream I produced. Graham, please stop! I wailed, begging my husband to let me go, to make the doctor stop from cutting any deeper to my skin. He didn't react, not to my voice or to my thrashing. He stayed silently above me, fixated on the steel frame of the door across the way. I knew my Graham wasn't there. This was just a shell. My vision grew hazy and everything got cold, blooming from the top of my skull and sinking down over the rest of my body. From then on, everything got choppy. I remember some parts, while blackness inhabits others. I blinked up at Graham before my head flopped over, my sweaty cheek hitting the cold table, replacing the chill that had set over my body with a new wave of heat. I could feel the blood rushing through my veins, pulsating under my fingertips and past my ears. I felt my nerves kick back up, trying to give me a boost of fight or flight energy. I tried speaking, but a sharp stab lit up my throat. It hurt even to breathe through my mouth. Because I was lying down, instead of my tears all spewing down my face, half of the salty mixture was draining down my throat, doing nothing to soothe the scream-torn tissue. I winced and picked up my head, hoarsely begging for them to stop. "Please, please," I slurred, no one hearing me. My head flopped back over to the side, and I lazily blinked through the haze fogging up my eyes. I could just see the left side of Dr. Stevens, blood and goo covering the front of his body. His feet stumbled to find traction against the now slick floor, but he stood his ground. He fought with the buzzing thing behind the curtain, ripping off bits of stringy hairs and grayish matter. He shook off his covered gloves, sending whatever gunk was inside of me flailing through the air. The room smelled of copper and earth. Something sweet, yet sour at the same time. Something I had smelled before, but I couldn't place my finger on. My eyes lulled in the back of my head, and the last thing I remember doing was looking at the clock. It felt like I'd been there for hours, but it had only been 5 minutes. We lost little one. I didn't want to believe it, and for the longest time, I denied it. I got angry, demanded to see my baby, threatened to sue the hospital for lying to me, for taking my baby away. But he had been taken away long before they had gotten to him. Yes, they told me little one was a boy. I was in the hospital for a month, and every day I demanded to see my baby. My throat was rickety from all the screaming, and turns out I did some damage to my vocal cords. But I didn't care. I still demanded to see my child, despite the no-talking orders. I'll never forget the night that acceptance flooded my heart. I cried so hard I threw up and passed out. I woke up to nurses picking my fallen body off the floor and putting me back into my bed. Oddly, accepting the fact that little one was dead wasn't the hardest part. It was dealing with how he died. That's what changed me. I knew the moment I heard how it happened that I transformed into a new person. An angry person. A vengeful person. My son was eaten. This is how they explained it. Something had gotten into my uterus, either by infected water or contaminated food. It somehow was transferred from my stomach to my uterus and was incubated alongside little one. Once the parasite, they called it, hatched, it consumed everything it could to gain nutrients. Being in such a nutrient-filled environment, it grew faster than it would have in nature, only taking a day to fully hatch and another to consume the nutrients needed to emerge. That was their explanation, but I knew the truth. This is what really happened. That bug freak with the stolen RV full of medical supplies injected me with that pregnant bug's larva. He was in my yard that night too, monitoring me. His host. The larva grew inside of me and ate my child. Once it had all the food it needed, it was ready to fully hatch. That's what was happening the day I went to the doctor's office. The fluttering tummy, how I thought little one was somersaulting around. That wasn't him. It was the winged thing trying to get out. The goo I saw covering the doctors and nurses that night. The gray stuff, the stringy material, it was all part of the larva's shedded skin. And that smell, the smell I couldn't quite put my finger on, finally came to me one night in bed. It smelled like the RV. It smelled like bugs. When I was released from the hospital, they told me I should see someone. A professional that would help me cope with everything that had happened. I didn't argue. I didn't care enough to argue. There was no coping with what had happened. There was no getting over it. Honestly, I didn't want to go back home. It didn't feel right. That was a life I had in the past. I was too different now to be comfortable there. Graham and I have struggled. We ignored each other at first. Even if we were in the same room, neither of us were really there. We eventually started talking again. Well, more like screaming. We didn't talk. We argued. He blamed me at first, telling me how he wanted to stay home, never wanted to go camping in the first place, didn't want to talk to the creepy guy, and didn't want to see his RV. He always yelled about how I should have listened, how if I had listened, he would have a son right now. We eventually stopped yelling and graduated to small talk. Past the salt. It's supposed to rain tomorrow. Want to watch TV? I don't know where we're going next, but we both agree on one thing. Little one's room doesn't get touched. That room's door has been firmly shut and it's going to stay that way. The yellow walls won't meet another human's eyes, and the elephant stuffed animals will never get to be cuddled. Not unless it's by our little one. My therapist said I needed to find a way to get everything out of my head. He suggested writing down my thoughts, so that's what I'm doing. writing down everything I think, regardless of how dark it gets. I showed him one entry that was nothing but ideas on how to track down that crazy, bug-loving freak, and just exactly what I want to do to him when I found him. My therapist says I shouldn't make such incriminating threats. I told him the same thing I told Graham that night around the campfire. I don't make threats. The doctor says I should get a job, find my passion, pick a hobby, start something that will fill the void that was little one. I don't know what I'm going to do or if it will even help. All I know is, when I find the man who did this, who preyed on us, who took my baby from me, I'm going to kill that son of a bitch.